Just letting everyone know we are live on YouTube.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Grant.
Joe, I know we're expecting several more people, right?
Yeah, I would give it a couple more minutes before we start.
Yeah, definitely.
It's 4, Ed.
What?
It's 4 o'clock.
I know, I'm on.
So I would say we could get started since Alexa's here and there's a couple people going to be missing, but we're only missing a few that said they were going to be here now. Couple. Eric said he was going to be here, but I haven't seen him. Julie. So I think we can get started.
All right, great. And we can, officially call the meeting to order.
So I'll do a roll call. That works for you guys.
Sounds good.
We're official. Eric Anderson. Looks like he's not here yet. Charles Gaston.
Here.
Deanna Volbitz.
Here.
Robert Erickson.
Here.
Julie Gardner. Absent. Alexis Gibson.
Here.
Danny Goldrich.
Here.
Ed Monick.
Here.
Vanessa Sivers. Absent. Kit Fisher.
Here.
And Ann Iverson. Absent. Okay, we're good.
Great, thank you. Did everyone have a chance to review the minutes that were distributed? Any comments?
No comments.
All right. If there are no corrections, the minutes stand approved.
I'll move that. I'll give you a twofer.
I'll move that we approve the minutes from the July 6, 2021 meeting and the September 13th, 2021 meeting, that they be approved as read.
Thank you. I forgot those were both in there. So is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right. Minutes are approved.
Jolanda?
Yep.
Sorry, I was here during the roll call, but I wasn't let in, so here I am. It's Julie.
Okay, you have to go through the meeting thing that I sent. I sent a meeting reminder about half hour before, and it'll get you right into the panelists. So I will, you and Eric Anderson as here.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'm not sure why I didn't get that email, Jolanda. Sorry.
It comes from a Marty Rabine or something like that. It's a little bit confusing.
Yeah, that's our city clerk. Eric, I'll check. I'll make a note to check on that and make sure you get that email.
All right. Do we have any, is it public or guest comments? Sorry to try to find the agenda again. So, I do not have anything to read about how.
Alexis, I'll make a note to send that to you. I apologize, but there is nobody out there right now to do anything. At the top of the agenda, it sort of tells you how to do it.
Okay. Yeah.
They just have been reading that, but I'll resend that to you.
Nope, that's fine. If I know it's just that text, that works. So.
Alexis, can I'm not sure exactly how, I think we need to take a motion on this, but I would like to propose an amendment to the agenda. I'd like to switch the Swatipcane area master plan with the growth policy review update, if that's okay with the group.
Looks like that's fine with everyone. So we will amend the agenda. All right. And then I don't think there's any, Grant, is there any announcements or?
I don't have any.
Does any other committee member have an announcement? Okay. See none, then I think we can just move to the discussion items.
I'm gonna try to share my screen here. Are you guys seeing that?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, let me see if I can start this bad boy. Okay, so I'm going to give you an update on a lot of the open space projects we have going on and that are in various stages of completion. Obviously, not all of these are projects that you guys have seen or vetted, but I wanted to certainly clue in on some of the progress we've been making on the projects that you guys have been a part of, and then also some other high-level open space projects that aren't necessarily directly in your sort of purview, but that are sort of highly visible projects that are important to the community. I'm also going to include the Swatipcane master plan, which was formerly the Mullen Area Master Plan, in this. So I'm going to kind of combine two agenda items here. I've got a series of maps and other things we can go through related to some of these projects, but I'll run through the list and kind of shuffle around, and feel free to interject if you have any questions. So the Bluebird property, you guys approved that, or recommended approval to council for that one back in 2019. If you recall, it is 124 acres over right off of Grant Creek Road. We are in the process, we just kicked off the management planning process for that parcel. CLAC, the Conservation Lands Advisory Committee, had their first meeting on that last month, just a few weeks ago. And will continue its discussion around that. I believe starting again in January. No decisions have been made at all. It's sort of it was sort of an introductory discussion. Just to orientate you guys, the yellow here, if you can see my cursor, is Bluebird. Again, 124 acres. This green hashed area is owned by Allied Waste, and it is a conservation easement held by Five Valleys Land Trust. This piece down here in the blue hatched is city-owned property with also a Five Valleys Land Trust held easement. When we're in discussions right now with Five Valleys Land Trust and Five Valleys Land Trust and Allied Waste regarding the 300-acre Allied Waste parcel. So we're hoping to that easement does allow public access. It's the configuration. There's really no rhyme or reason as to why, but the conservation easement only allows. There's a 10-foot trail easement that goes around, or trail allowance rather, that goes around the east, south, and west boundaries only. We are hoping to sort of to amend that conservation easement to give us some flexibility so that we're not just tied to fence lines arbitrarily. So again, I don't think there was any purpose behind that. I think that was just something that was decided sort of arbitrarily. So my point is, we're going to be looking at this 424 acres comprehensively, and also, of course, future connections over into the Rattlesnake and potentially National Wildlife Federation and North Hills and beyond. So you guys have the ability to get engaged in that if you so choose. Starting in January at CLAC, and then of course we'll be taking it to Parks Board after that and Council. So plenty of opportunities to get engaged there. The idea right now, and this obviously will evolve, but is to sort of use a good portion of the road grades that already exist there. We've identified we've done the site assessment, inventory assessment, and identified all of the sort of seeps, sensitive habitat areas. There's some Missoula phlox patches, some sort of riparian draws, if you will, and so we're attempting to avoid those areas with trails and human impact. So we've put together, and this is not right to share with you guys just yet, but we put together some initial ideas or concepts around where some trails might go, avoiding some of those sensitive areas. And again, that will evolve through the Conservation Lands Advisory Committee's process. So please get engaged. We're hoping to start that back up in January with an eye towards completing that management plan, I believe early to mid next spring. Any questions on Bluebird? Eric, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah. Can you just clarify that the planning process that CLAC will undertake is for all three of those parcels you were showing? Is that?
No, just right now, just the two, the yellow and the green. The blue is under an agricultural lease right now, which will expire soon, and certainly we'll consider future connections, but it won't be a part of the master planning process for this area. And honestly, we're hoping to engage Allied Waste in that and include that piece of property, but the city nor CLAC has any authority to actually manage that until Five Valleys agrees to our terms, and I assume we'll likely transfer management of the trail over to us. So it's more of an aspirational look at our hopes to include that parcel, if it makes sense. But the blue, again, is under agricultural lease, so it will not be included.
Another question, that blue peninsula to the north of the green tract, is that under city? What's the status of that property?
I believe that's an older conservation easement, and I don't think it allows public access.
Does it get as far as Forest Service or National Wildlife Federation, or can you tell?
I think it does. Yeah, I'm not super familiar with that. I'm fairly positive. The reason why we aren't talking about it is because it doesn't entail public access.
Okay.
But I will say, going back to sort of the bigger picture, as you guys know, probably there's some county subdivision land that's sort of in litigation or the future's unknown. And then, of course, there's the Forest Service land that leads into the Rattlesnake, and then the National Wildlife Federation owns about 700-ish acres. So there's a lot of connectivity and possibilities there, and we are certainly turning over every stone there. I've been talking with Kit Fisher and NWF about and the Forest Service about the NWF parcel. We've been talking to the county about potential connections over to the Forest Service land and NWF. So a lot of those discussions are happening. So there's a lot of sort of momentum right now in this area. Deanna?
Yeah, mine's super simple. When you say get involved, will you include us or those that want to be involved on the relevant emails for things like that? Because I don't always follow like CLAC's emails or meetings and things like that.
Yeah, I think that I can just make a note to make sure that you guys receive the meeting agendas and invites. And obviously you won't be panelists, but you'll be joining as members of the public.
Thanks.
Is that wait, yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
You bet. Any other questions? I can't see everybody. Is there any other hands up? Okay, moving on. Marshall Mountain. Quick update on the public planning process component. We had a series of stakeholder meetings recently. I believe there was 4 of them, and we broke those up into different categories: outdoor recreation, environmental stewardship, education, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and infrastructure and safety. And we had, so we sort of cast a broad net to try to get as much participation as possible. And we did have excellent participation. So we did several meetings, and our exercise was basically with an eye towards sort of developing a broad vision of, a broad initial vision, I should say, of what Marshall Mountain could look like. The next step is to engage a design consulting firm. And we put out an RFP and got 5 bids submitted as part of that, and we'll be reviewing those starting late November, here in just a couple of weeks. So we'll be hiring a design consultant firm to help guide us through the sort of master planning and design process. And what that will look like is sort of to be determined, but we know we'll have a series of public open houses. So probably at least one for Missoula, and we're hoping to have another separate one. Obviously everybody's welcome, but more geared towards Bonner, Milltown, East Missoula. And then we'll obviously be re-engaging all of those stakeholders probably along the way as well. So that's kind of where we are with the public planning side of things. And all the information you could ever want to know is on the Engage Missoula page for Marshall Mountain. We have also propped up a friends group, Friends of Marshall Mountain, that will be sort of the entity that's leading the charge on fundraising. They'll be working under the Friends of Missoula Parks umbrella, and Friends of Missoula Parks will be the fiscal sponsor for the fundraising and just sort of consolidating all of the funding for Marshall Mountain so that the city itself doesn't hold those funds and we're not leading the fundraising campaign. So we haven't kicked off any sort of fundraising efforts yet, other than some targeted bigger donor outreach. We're hoping to kick off that plan once we have this sort of master vision and after these public open houses, and we're able to sort of synthesize all that information into our community's vision for the mountain, and then again, open it up to fundraising. As far as OSAC engagement, I will certainly keep you guys updated thoroughly along the way. I don't have an exact target of when the project itself will be formally coming to you guys for open space bond funding request, but I imagine it will be sometime next summer or fall, if I had to guess. The timeline is a bit fluid, but we will be ironing out the timeline here in the next couple of months. So I will, again, certainly keep you guys updated. Any questions about Marshall Mountain? Don't see any hands raised. Fort Missoula Ponds property, if you guys remember, I'll just give a quick refresh. Fort Missoula Ponds property was the old Knife River gravel pit out on the Bitterroot River off of 40th Avenue. over just sort of in the shadow of Macaulay Butte. That was a gravel pit that was no longer in service and was reclaimed. We went through the full DEQ reclamation process, and it was gifted to the city by Joel T. Long / Knife River. So we do own it right now. It's about 86 acres. And of course, there's 2 large ponds, excellent riparian habitat, river frontage, excellent migratory waterfowl habitat with the ponds, are some of the largest freshwater ponds in the Missoula area. We were going to run through the public planning and design process sort of simultaneously with Marshall Mountain. I believe, wisely decided not to do that and push it off for a year. Not that it's more important. Not that Marshall is more important. It wasn't a priority thing. It was Marshall Mountain has a hard deadline because it's owned privately and Fort Ponds does not. So likely about this time next year, we'll kick off the sort of full-blown public planning process. There will be obviously some engagement opportunities for the public prior to that. We'll be doing probably a series of site visits and things like that when it gets warmer next year. So look for that. I can keep you guys updated on that. I know you guys were just out there, but when we start sort of reopening the discussion around what that place might look like, I will certainly keep you guys updated. Any questions on that one? Actually, before I take questions, one more thing. If you guys recall, we were attempting to obtain public access to the site because it doesn't currently have that. I have made some great strides with the neighbor to secure public access, probably an easement from the northwest corner, so sort of the Macaulay Butte side. We just need to finalize that document, and I have reasonable assurances from the university that they'll grant public access from the east side across there. They own about 30 acres adjacent upstream. So it's looking good there. There's obviously going to be a big Board of Regents process on the university side, but it's looking like we'll have public access from both sides. And then, of course, the design, there's the devil's in the details as to how we actually access the property, whether it be motorized or non-motorized. Any questions? Don't see any. Moving on, Lincoln Hills Trails reconfiguration, I'm calling it. I don't know if you guys have heard about this. This is not anything you guys would have been involved in, and it's a fairly new process, but kind of stepping back, Lincoln Hills and the Jumbo area, when it was acquired, there was never really a plan or a trails sort of vision that was adopted. It was sort of, there was a bunch of user created social trails and old road grades. And we sort of took that and that historic use, and it evolved into what we now know as the Jumbo sort of trail system. So because of that, it has been a bit of the Wild West out there. Trails have been built through private land and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of issues. We're not planning the sort of a massive overhaul by any means, but it's just more taking a hard look, taking a step back and looking at let's avoid private lands. Let's make sure we're avoiding, bikes ripping down hills at pedestrians. And so I don't think that there's going to be a whole wave of change there, but we are looking at probably decommissioning certain portions of the trail. And most of this is taking place closer to the Lincoln Hills trailhead than anywhere else. So that process again just kicked off. That is CLAC running through that process. That one is something you guys can get engaged in as well. CLAC will be continuing that discussion, I believe, at its December meeting, and that again will go through Parks Board and Council. So there'll be plenty of times for the public to be engaged. And I think there's a Engage Missoula page on that one as well. If there isn't now, there will be soon. Questions on that one?
Do you envision any bond fund monies going into that?
I do not. Yeah, I think I don't know. I don't, obviously we haven't decided this. I don't know if we're going to build new trails. I know that there will be, a lot of it will be sort of creating, steering bikes over to this trail, pedestrians over here. This one might be a directional trail from the trailhead to avoid, again, bikes coming down and people going up. I imagine there might be some new trails or connectors built, but again, that'll be hashed out in the design process. But I don't anticipate any bond requests, no.
There are some very steep, non-standard trails to get to the top of Mount Jumbo from Lincoln Saddle.
Indeed, there are. Yeah, and obviously resource considerations like erosion and things like that as well will be taken into consideration. I don't anticipate any changes with the closures either, as far as the elk population there being affected. Clark Fork River restoration and access. If you guys recall, that was one of the 3 capital improvement bond requests that you guys approved back in 2019. And it was approved at $225,000 of open space bond funds, mostly for planning and engineering. We have reached the point of receiving 90% design plans, or we're about to, for that project. So if you remember, it's again taking a hard look at planning around restoration and how the public accesses the stretch of the Clark Fork River, primarily through the downtown and extending a little bit beyond that. There's also an Engage Missoula page for that one. At some point I want to show you guys the plan. I don't think it's posted yet, but I do want to I'll bring in Jeff and Morgan to run you guys through that when it gets a little bit more ripe and we're ready to start moving forward. We are in the process right now of looking at the costs involved with that and identifying funding sources for actual construction of restoration projects, putting in durable access points. So we don't know what that's going to cost yet. There likely will be bond requests for that one. We have, of course, one of our primary objectives for almost all of these projects is to leverage open space bond investments. So we're looking at some tourism grants and some other funding sources to, again, help leverage and stretch those open space bond dollars. And yeah, I think that's where we are right now. I've been working to expend bond dollars on any piece of ground we have to designate it as open space. So I'll be probably working pretty closely with the conservation land staff and develop park staff to make sure these places are actually designated as open space. That might entail acquiring easements and things like that, which you guys may or may not need to vet depending on whether or not it's costing us any money. So that's another way that OSEC might be engaged moving forward. Any questions on that project? That's an exciting one.
Yeah, there has been some fence construction and restoration work near the Missoulian building. Yep. Is that independent of the restoration access project, or?
Yeah, that is independent. Yeah, that bond funds were not spent on that. Other questions? Moving on, Waterworks Hill Trailhead improvements. That was another one of the 3 capital improvement projects that was funded back in 2019. And that one was part of the broader revamping of the trailhead system in Missoula. So that's moving along. We're upgrading a lot of the trailhead infrastructure and kiosks slowly but surely. But Waterworks Hill is moving forward. It's fully funded. If you recall that capital improvement project was funded at $300,000 from the open space bond, and that's not just Waterhead. Again, it includes the whole updating of the trailhead infrastructure across Missoula's system. We have received a ton of additional funding from outside the bond, including city water, RTP, some gas tax. So we've been really successful leveraging the open space bond investment there. Construction on that one will begin in April. So we've got all of the construction contracts and bidding and plans in place, but we're waiting, of course, until the ground thaws. I do have the final design concept for that. I think you guys may have seen this in its former iteration, but I don't know if you can see that or it's too small, but my computer's not cooperating. Okay. So if you can follow my cursor, this Greeno Drive here, of course, this is the way that you currently access Waterworks Hill Trailhead, called Minkler Loop. I believe we're going to change that. I hope we do. This sort of bend right here goes through private land, and I worked really closely with Public Works on securing some construction documents and easements across this private land here. And then back onto city property here, this is our new parking lot. I believe it's something like 40 parking spaces. I know it's changed over time, so I don't know the exact number. And here's obviously a turnaround in the trailhead here. This trail here will be an ADA accessible trail that it kind of circles Missoula water infrastructure. And then of course the trail leading into like the North Hills is up here. I think there's a connection there. So again, that's an exciting one. It was our most highly used trailhead. I think Lincoln Hills surpassed it just this year, but still a very highly used trailhead. Really cool accessibility potential here. It's one of the only places that people with disabilities can get up high and get some of the vistas looking out over the city. So really great project, fully funded, and it should be open next summer. Any questions on that one?
So you
Just about
anticipate,
Oh, sorry. Just about the longer driveway. Is it going to be designed in a way that prevents people from parking on it? Or is parking going to be allowed on it? I just was wondering if that's going to be problematic.
Yeah, so the last I heard, we're hoping to design it in a way where people cannot park. There'll be a sidewalk along the whole thing, which is great for pedestrian access. There might be some spots in this area, if you can see my cursor, for parallel parking, but I believe we're discouraging parking along the road just because there's been issues with dogs and near misses with people getting hit by cars, and it's just, as you guys know, it's just super congested and you can't turn around very easily. So I think we're trying to avoid that with a pretty big parking lot here. I believe, if you guys know, there's some parallel parking here along Greeno. I think there's no plan to change that, so I think that would be overflow parking still.
do you anticipate using the entire 300,000 that we approved for this project?
No, nope. I don't have the breakdown on funding, but that 300,000 was for Waterworks Hill, as well as the update of Missoula's sort of trailhead infrastructure system. So it is not all going towards Waterworks Hill.
But nothing at this point remitted to the bond fund.
Say that again.
That entire 300,000 will be used for something.
Correct. Yeah.
Nothing will be remitted back to the bond fund or.
Correct. Yeah. And and there's a detailed budget out there that I think you guys saw sort of when it was, and it's again for former iteration, and I can show you guys sort of where that money will go if you want. I don't have the breakdown on the top of my head. But I can assure you that whatever doesn't go to Waterworks Hill Trailhead, we desperately need some updates of some of our kiosk and trailhead infrastructure. So it'll be money well spent, in my opinion. Moving on, unless there's any other questions, the third capital improvement project that was funded with open space bond funding partially was the urban reforestation project. That one was funded at $250,000. And the only thing is that one's moving forward. We've been successful in planting trees around Missoula as planned. We recently received a DNRC grant of $50K to further leverage those open space bond dollars. And all of that together has helped us invest in a ball and burlap nursery over at the Poplar Farm. So it's sort of investing in this ability to more efficiently and quickly and more inexpensively grow trees for our system. So I think that conservation land staff and our city staff has done a really good job of taking those bond dollars and stretching them and leveraging them with other outside funding sources. And again, this nursery will really help us cut costs on keeping our urban forest healthy and expanding as the growth expands. Questions on that one? Don't see any. The airport Swatipcane area parkland and development. So formerly the Mullen Area Master Plan, now the Swatipcane Area Neighborhoods Master Plan was adopted back in December of 2020. And that one is sort of a broader city county effort around really taking a hard look and planning for substantial growth in the Mullen area. This is a sort of a concept of the boundary of that planning effort. And I don't know if you can read all of this, but we've identified sort of a portfolio or like a patchwork of different parks and open space amenities, from neighborhood parks all the way down to community parks. And then on top of this, we sort of overlaid it with our level of service radii, if you will. The green are existing neighborhood parks. The yellow, these two yellows on the bottom here are sort of proposed parks, I'll call them. Although that's sort of a loose term. And then this one up here is sort of an ideal park. Those are neighborhood parks again. This peach colored area is where we've identified a community park. And these level of service radii are according to our master parks plan. So our objective is to have a neighborhood park within a half mile of every home or residence in Missoula. And community park, this one should actually be bigger because the level of service for community parks is actually 1.5 miles, within 1.5 miles of every home in Missoula. So we've identified this wedge here, this is actually on airport property. Airport property, if you can follow my cursor, is kind of jogs like this. And we've been working with the airport to sort of identify the feasibility of that. We had a really good talk with them just this week. I think it's worth mentioning that the airport is going through a master planning process starting next year. So we're trying to get out in front of that and sort of make sure that we are keeping our level of service out in the Mullen area before it gets developed and land becomes even more expensive than it already is. So anyway, we're working with the airport. I think we have a good path forward for securing a community park here. I've also been working with CFAC, the Community Food and Agriculture Coalition, on a project that might also be located in this area here. And I think it's a really, really cool partnership possibility. What they want to do is a farm incubator project, which would essentially be, I think they're looking for about 60 acres, and it would be small plots for typically beginning farmers and ranchers to sort of lease at little to no cost a plot of land to kind of cultivate their crop, learn, and then move to a bigger piece of property. So it's this really cool sort of farmer education program that CFAC has been trying to get started for a long time now. So I think there's a cool possibility that the city could acquire a big chunk of land, lease some for agriculture, and then the rest would be used hopefully for a community park. And I've got a sort of an exhibit here that this is pulled from the master parks plan as well. And there's a lot of colors here, but this sort of seafoam green blob is our is our existing community park service area. And the airport is this pink property here. So you can see there's a pretty big glaring gap right here in our community park service area. And so that's where this new community park will come in. And the idea is, community parks by definition are anywhere from 25 to 100 or more acres. And typically, at least in Missoula, a component of that, and especially in this case, would be sports fields and courts. But they're not usually more than 50% of a community park. So that also leaves open many acres for our more traditional park features. So anyway, long story short, I think we're looking at opportunities to continue our level of service with this anticipated growth out in the Mullen area. And we're hoping to do it on airport property because airport property is generally cheaper than privately owned property. Questions on that one?
Is under the yellow overlay, yeah, there's bluish sort of areas. Are those along Grant Creek, or under the yellow overlay, and under the peach overlay are some blue or pondy looking area? Are those ponds, or what are those?
Those are, honestly, I don't know. I've asked that same question. I think it was sort of floodplainish, although it's not actually necessarily floodplain. I would disregard them. This channel right here is the sort of supposed to depict the original channel of Grant Creek. We're hoping to because as you know, it kind of does something like this now. It's just been kicked around, poor little creek. We're hoping to rechannelize it, bring it back to its former corridor. That's aspirational at this point. The airport has to agree to that. They're not opposed to it, but the name of the game for the airport is to mitigate waterfowl airplane interactions. And so anything that attracts wildlife, especially waterfowl, they have to be really careful about for obvious reasons. So I don't know where that one's going. We're hoping that, aspirationally speaking, again, Grant Creek restored back to its former glory with healthy riparian corridor and buffers, with a potentially primitive or even mixed surface trail along that could provide some cool connections up into Grant Creek. That would be my hope. But again, it really is dependent on what that project looks like and how the airport's comfort zone is. Any other questions? And this community park, if it moves forward, it won't be a full bond request, but there might be some open space bond requests there as well. And I'll keep you guys updated as that one evolves. Milwaukee Trail Extension. That's a good segue. So this is the Milwaukee Trail, this is the current terminus here at Reserve Street. The red is Reserve Street, if you can't see that. And I've drawn a line of what the Milwaukee Trail will, probably the path it will likely follow. We have easements, or we own a good portion of this. So this is the Colon Ditch property. This is the Klaus easement, Klaus here, Colon Ditch here. These two stretches here are Knife River. We have an easement on this one. Are you guys seeing my cursor? I'm just moving it around.
Yes.
We do have an easement on this Knife River portion. We do not have one on the portion underneath on south of the pond. I just reached out to Knife River this week to hopefully open that discussion. So I'm hoping to get some positive news there and a path forward on either acquiring this or acquiring an easement. That would bring us all the way from Reserve to Mullen. This stretch here, as we talked about with Schmidt Road, there's a house built smack dab in the middle of the Milwaukee corridor here. So ultimately we might be able to acquire some of this and reroute, but right now I'm assuming we will follow the recently acquired Schmidt Road easement, as you guys remember, take us to Mullen Road. The county's working on the Mullen Trail, which follows, of course, Mullen Road. And then we'll be on Hiawatha. And there's a series of, there's sort of a patchwork of ownerships over here. There'll be some challenging maneuvers, I would call it. But I think that there's, I think that there's some daylight there to extend the Milwaukee Trail on its, if not on it or close to its historic path. And then this stretch here, I didn't actually label it as such, but this stretch here is about a mile and a half of airport owned Milwaukee Trail, and they're more than willing to sell that to us. So I'm in the process of working through, there's some FAA, Federal Aviation Administration red tape that the airport has to go through. They can't sell that property unless it's a fair market value, like arm's length transaction. So I'm kind of putting together a package that shows us the process. And I'm working with a willing airport who will likely, if all goes as planned, sell us that Milwaukee Trail stretch as soon as next year. So there's a lot of momentum going on out in the airport, Swatip, Kane, Mullen area right now, and especially with the Milwaukee Trail. Questions on that project, Eric?
Yeah, and I guess west of here, I think I've seen some privately owned pieces of the Milwaukee that break it up a bunch. Have you identified those? Is that going to be an issue extending through there in the future?
Yeah, I've
pretty far out.
That's getting pretty far out in the county, and I'm trying to work with the county to kind of spur them to help start taking a look at that Milwaukee Trail extension. And they're interested, but they've got other priorities right now. But you're right. There are some challenges out that way. But I think that there's some room to strategically maneuver around some of those private ownerships that are like in the traditional or historic path. And there is, I think I've mentioned this with Schmidt Road, there's a national effort ongoing right now, the Great American Rail Trail, to connect the entire Milwaukee Road all the way across the country with other rail trails. So I think there will be increased funding for that will not just be Missoula centric, that we could probably tap into in the future. So it is certainly aspirational and it is certainly challenging, but I do think that there is a way forward, and it's worth just opening those conversations, because there's so many different small ownerships and it's so fragmented. It's gonna take a team. It can't just be me and the city talking to all these landowners, especially because it's so far out. So I'm hoping the city I don't know if it's public, so I'm not going to say a name, but the city just hired sort of my counterpart, somebody who will hopefully be doing open space projects. So that's really exciting news, and I think it'll be a new dawn or new era for the county as far as doing more open space projects. So that'll be housed in their Parks, Trails, and Open Lands department. So I'm hoping to, long story short, I'm hoping to draw more attention to the Milwaukee Trail extension and create a more collaborative effort rather than just the city trying to acquire everything.
So I got that right. The county is hiring sort of your equivalent for
Yes.
open space. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought I heard city, but anyway.
Oh, sorry. Maybe I might have said city, but the county. Other questions?
Grant, I'm excited about the Milwaukee Trail extension, but I'm also curious about the closer to reserve part of it, the Colon Ditch portion, and of course the island, which is now city-owned open space. Maybe you can give us some details about that, and not only when the trail might be open there, which involves a bridge and a bunch of other things, but also the island portion as well.
Yeah, the old elephant in the room, the bridge across the Clark Fork River. No big deal, right?
No big deal.
Yeah, thanks, Rob, for that. So I believe it was last July, all my years are running together at this point in the pandemic. Either this July or last July, the Conservation Lands Advisory Committee approved the management and recreation plan for the Clark Fork Islands, we're calling it, and that's sort of an extension of the Tower Street Conservation Area. I think ultimately it might all at some point be called the Clark Fork Islands. We've talked about that, but it's not yet. That one, I without zooming in, it's hard to tell, but there's additional trails planned over near the wastewater treatment plant on the I guess it would be like the northwest side of the river that are not existing now, that will lead to the Milwaukee Trail. The Colon Ditch property will be built out at some point. I think we're probably putting a pin in that until we know what's going to happen with the bridge. But there's some other sort of like natural kids play area plan there, and just light infrastructure. So there's some planning that's been done there and on that area. But at this point, I don't know when those additional trails will be built. There is an island here. So there's one channel that has an existing sort of super old railroad bridge that I think we've looked at. I don't know that we've looked at it super scientifically from an engineer standpoint, but from at least a city's engineer's informal take, that bridge might be usable in the future. So when we cross that one bridge, there's an island, and we do have like a birding loop planned on that island. And that's, again, there'll be bike racks on the Milwaukee Trail is the idea. It'll be a really cool property. Just for, again, it'll be a pedestrian loop. And then, of course, the expensive part starts, and that's the bridges over the Clark Fork, the other Clark Fork channels. I don't have an update on where that stands. We got as far as putting that out to bid, and as far as the engineering plans, I believe we selected an engineering firm, and I don't believe it's funded. So there's still some more work to be done there. And so what I'll do is I'll check with Jeff and Morgan to see when. We've just got so many projects in the works, and I think Bluebird is in Marshall Mountain and Knife River Ponds are now kind of, Fort Missoula Ponds are kind of on the front burner. So I will ask those guys when we plan to construct some of those trails and get back to you guys. Does that get at your question, Rob?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
And then as far as the other thing that I'm super curious about as well is when we might, again, I'm hoping to have some positive conversations with Knife River around this here. But as far as actually building this portion of the trail out, even if we don't have bridges, we're still expecting a ton of growth in this area. And this would be a really great path to get people down to those future sort of primitive trails and just river access. So I still think it's worth pushing some of the folks at the city to look at planning this and potentially constructing this portion of the trail. I don't know how far that is out, but I imagine that is probably going to happen sooner than the bridge, and I'll be pushing for that personally.
On a related piece of property, the city wastewater treatment plant has that large tract that they have planted all the hybrid poplars for tertiary treatment, water treatment. Do you hear anything about what they're up to and what their plans are? Is that owned by the plant or is that rented, or what's the story on that? Do you know?
I believe that's owned by the city now. Yeah, I don't know what the plan is. I think the plan is to continue using that. And I do think that's where the new site of that nursery I mentioned for our urban forestry department will be. So yeah, ball and burlap trees will be grown there. But what the long-term plan is, I don't know. I know there's a bit of controversy around that, but I won't get into it.
I think they were hoping to harvest trees, but there isn't a market anymore, or there was some foul up about that.
Yeah, and that's why, and I think that's why a portion of it will sort of be transitioned into this new nursery. And I think the other sort of long-term objectives are kind of being ironed out right now.
Thank you.
I don't have a great answer for you, sorry. Other questions? Milwaukee Trail or any of the other?
Grant, there's a person from the public that has their hand up.
Oh. Joe, I'm not seeing anybody. What's the protocol?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I may be a little late, but I was curious about the Swatipscane master plan area up above. I know the airport is going to be a big part of the restoration of Grant Creek, but can you talk a little bit about any conversations with the railroad, with MRL, about access for the trails you mentioned, or really anything involving your conversations with them at this point? I know that's right at the boundary, but I imagine they'll be a big part of this.
MRL.
Oh, Montana Rail Link.
Do you mind identifying yourself for the record?
Yeah, sorry, my name is Seamus Land. I'm a grad student at the university.
Welcome, thanks for the question. I have to admit, can you help me on the map here, where we're talking about?
It would be on the upstream side, that large flat side.
Oh, up near Broadway.
Right, exactly. And so right along there's the railroad as well.
Yeah.
And the right of way.
The creek
so we have. Well.
Yeah. That's a great question. So like you mentioned, it's just outside the boundary of the Swatipscane area plan. So I haven't been involved with I've only been involved with sort of the parkland planning side and open space and a little bit of the Grant Creek. I haven't been involved with a lot of the talks around transportation and infrastructure other than the overlap it would have with commuter trails and parks. What I can say, at least the part that's in my purview, is that if you see this big development here, there's another one planned over to the east of that. We are looking at ways to get some of these folks, and there will likely be future development over there, likely trying to get those folks across Broadway somehow, or across the railroad tracks via underpass, overpass, over into some of this parkland. So like we're looking at parkland here, some proposals here and here. And of course, if this community park opens up, especially So yeah, that's the piece that we've been looking at. I don't know what kind of talks we've had with MRL, and I certainly haven't had any directly. I can say, speaking more to connectivity, a little bit further down, there's an underpass at Wheeler. We're looking at sort of memorializing some public access to get people under the highway there as well, with an eye towards connectivity. That's closer over to Reserve. But yeah, as far as the railroad interaction with the Swatipcane area, I can't speak super well to that. Does that help at all?
It does. I mean, yeah, just good to hear about the ideas of connectivity along the creek or just in those areas that are really broken up by the road and the railroad and the interstate, like you mentioned. So thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, you bet. Any other questions? Okay. Well, and like I said, I think as some of these projects move forward where it makes sense, I will be bringing in some other members of the city parks team to discuss some of this stuff before, especially if there's some planned open space bond requests. So to get out in front of that, make sure you guys are tracking on those projects before we bring a request forward. The growth policy review, moving on, unless there's anything else. Alexis, is that our next agenda item, I believe?
Yeah, yes, it is. So
this one is just a quick update. I've been talking a lot here per usual, but so I was part of a growth policy review team that the city put together, and it was comprised of primarily folks from the planning department, which we now call community planning, development and innovation, public works, and I was of course the parks representative. And state law requires that a municipality review its growth policy every 5 years. So that was sort of the impetus for it. And we took a comprehensive look at our growth policy and put together a package of recommendations and unanswered questions and things to explore. And all of that is out on Engage Missoula. I am not going to attempt to get into the details of that. I can certainly do that in the future if we want, but there's a lot of things that you guys are likely interested in, but don't directly pertain to parks. But it is a document that really helps guide and inform our growth in our community. And it is a pretty interesting time to be a Missoulian right now. We're experiencing some growing pains, as I call them. There's kind of a transition going on, as you guys are well aware. So it was good timing from that perspective. I don't have any sort of finite idea as to when the actual changes to the growth policy might be implemented. I am part of the team that will be looking at the next step, and that's actually implementing some of those changes. But I just wanted to kind of let you guys know that's in the works, more as just a broad community document that, again, will help guide and inform how we grow. So it's something to be engaged in, and I can certainly, and one thing I was going to propose, if you guys want, I can certainly bring some folks in to help take a deeper dive into the growth policy and where it might be going. I don't know that it's the best time right now, but once we have more clear direction, then it might make sense. But certainly up to you guys.
Do they incorporate much in the way of open space aspirations or goals or objectives in that growth management plan or that growth plan?
Yeah, and if you're familiar with growth policies, it typically doesn't get down into the weeds of specific projects. I think that there are some, like primary commuter arteries that are mentioned generally, and maybe even Milwaukee Trail and Bitter Trail are mentioned, but it doesn't get down into the details. What it does is it has a whole appendix that references all the city plans, and it also references the open space plan, the master parks and recreation plan, long range transportation plan, and all these other things that actually do take a deeper dive into detailed projects and priorities.
Okay.
And again, all that information's out on the Engage Missoula page. Lots of good stuff to dive into there. It's pretty robust.
There's lots of stuff on the Engage Missoula plan. You could spend your entire career following those.
Yeah, it could stand a bit of cleaning up, and that's something we've been talking about because there's no like sunset on things. It's a manual thing to go in and remove a project that's completed, and a lot of projects are just ongoing, so that page fills up pretty quickly.
I think that would be an interesting thing to have at a future meeting if there were some people who could come talk
Sure.
to us about it.
Okay. I think it does tie in really well with a lot of the things that you guys look at, you know, the lens that you guys look at the community through when you're looking at open space projects. I think that's all I had for that agenda item.
Thank you.
Thanks for the updates. That was great to see where all those projects are.
Sure. And if there's anything that you guys, if you guys want more information on, you know, always feel free to reach out to me directly rather than the group. Yeah, I want to make sure you guys are apprised of what's going on that's pertains to what you guys do.
Okay. This isn't on the agenda. I think this technically could be covered by the discussions and updates. Grant, what are we doing for our December meeting? I'm guessing we're not having a party. So
I that's to be determined, I'd say.
okay.
I have been thinking about it, and I want to talk to Morgan about what's happening with CLAC. I think that they're probably just going to have their regularly scheduled meeting. I don't know of any agenda items right now. And I don't think there's a holiday party planned, unfortunately. Although we could maybe plan our own, I don't know. Probably shouldn't have said that.
CLAC's having their normal meeting.
Okay. Great. So I don't think there's any other presentation, discussion, or updates or future or held items, unless anything has come up to anyone post presentations. And so if there is nothing else, we can adjourn the meeting. I can never remember if we need to vote on that or not. So.
No, you don't need to vote on it.
Okay, thank you. By the end, I'm just like, great, we're done. So it was great to see everyone.
Thanks very much, guys.
Good to see everybody.
Thanks, everyone. See you later.
Bye, guys. Have a good evening.